on one of our upper ridge pastures, demonstrating one of the techniques we use for establishing silvopasture trees. In this case, we've taken an open field, poor soils, and we've cut in sort of various tree lines that we've planted with both like a pioneer species of cheap loblolly pine that's there to sort of nurse and support some understory oaks, pecans. Over here we have some actually some Mexican plums that we dabbled with, various other sort of hardwoods, some persimmon. And the goal here is really to provide that environment to support establishment of these trees that are used to growing up in an understory environment with shade and higher humidity. And you can use tree tubes, and we do use that for some species, but in this case, sort of experimenting with planting the pines, knowing that we're going to come in over time, like where we are now. This is about, I think, 8 or 9 years maybe. I think these were planted, and and we could have thinned them sooner, but this is sort of where we are. We're high pruning, taking some out. They're being chipped. Some of the piles are like a wheelbarrow size pile is kept here, dumped on around the trees. That'll sort of, we keep it in a pile to sort of maintain moisture and allow it to break down and start to move towards more of a fungal dominated system versus a bacteria one. The wood chip piles out here are breaking down, both supporting the existing trees but also creating conditions to plant another succession of understory trees at some point. The ideal is to chip up what we would call a ramial wood chip. So it's 3-4 inch diameter branches, ideally in the growing season, with with green leaves on it, and that's going to give you a much better carbon nitrogen ratio than chipping up higher carbon older wood, thicker wood, which still has its use. But if you're trying to get sort of more of a rapid decomposition, you sort of stick with the ramial wood chips. But so these pines and other cheap pioneers, I mean, they cost less than $1. They're easy to stick in the ground when you're already prepping your tree lines and planting. And we also are loading up a trailer, and that'll go to our other production systems, some of our gardens and our no-till production, and we lay them out in our walkways, and that breaks down, and we flip that onto beds over time. And just out here, just having these trees and these tap-rooted pines are punching down into the soil and helping pull up nutrients and minerals that have basically leached down into the deeper soil profile that's not available necessarily for some of our more herbaceous grass and forb species. And again, keep in mind, our main enterprise here is sheep. So having these trees and planting trees out in full sun, you're getting multiple benefits. One, just allowing to do the rotational grazing, to have the distributed shade. You're also creating fodder and mass producing species, and you're improving both the water and nutrient cycle through the improved uptake and overall management of things. So when we're going and chopping down a conifer versus a hardwood, we're terminating that tree entirely. It's not going to regrow. So that's a massive amount of root dieback that's occurring and really help opening these soils up. I mean, we have these are pretty tight, shallow soils. They aren't deep, well-draining redland. So using trees and using the natural succession of our environment here to help sort of advance the ecological function of our land has really sort of been a key strategy for us. So what we're doing really with these pines is trying to mimic natural succession in this region. This also being more of an upland part of our farm. Overall it's sort of an oak hickory dominated ecosystem, but pines are going to be sort of the early pioneers that help pave the way, prepare the soil, change the acidity, create the understory habitat for the oak and the hickories to establish. So we're just sort of amplifying that, planting both at the same time. And you don't have to. You could plant the pines first, let those establish, do what we're doing to come in, thin them, chip on site, prepare the soil, use that to sort of knock out some of the sod and the herbaceous systems and then plant your understory hardwoods under that, or you can kind of do it at the same time as we have. You just have to kind of make sure you're protecting those like we discussed, if you're running livestock in it as we are. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about just the wood chipper that we're using and the reasons for selecting this. You know, this is a PTO driven wood chipper. It can handle about an 8-inch log. The PTO horsepower on this tractor is somewhere around like 55 horsepower. So it's quite a bit of power to run through it. You know, you keep your blades sharp, and you can really do a lot of production. You could certainly invest in a larger commercial, you know, chipper with its own engine, but that's just another piece of equipment to maintain. And so this is running off your tractor. You're already maintaining your tractor for other uses, and it's also pretty maneuverable. You know, you're not trailing it around, so I can get into pretty tight spots. I can take it into the woods and harvest free fertility there. It's worked out well for us. You know, I can usually pulling up a trailer to it with an ATV, you know, really sort of keeping ground impact in our pastures to a minimum. You know, we don't chip all year. We sort of stop when things get too dry. We don't want to lock out moisture by putting down a big layer of wood chips that are certainly chipped really small. That's going to keep moisture from getting down into the ground. So whether we're actively cutting to chip right away, or we're going ahead as part of our regular rotations with the sheep and livestock and high pruning trees and staging piles to come back and chip later, we're always laying them in piles with sort of the butt end of the branch sort of all in one direction, typically where I'm going to pull in with the chipper. We're always loading the chipper, you know, with the butt end. It's just, it feeds better, and you're less likely to, you know, if you go with the other way and the branch is getting bigger, you have a higher risk of bogging down the chipper. So you always go in with the butt end, and you really have to learn to manage, you know, how much you can kind of feed. Once you start getting a bunch of green leafy material in there, it sort of slows down. It doesn't feed as well, so you kind of just have to read it, knowing how much moisture, how much leaf matter. And different species are easier to chip than others. You know, some of the stuff with broad, wider crotch angles, willow oak and hackberry aren't necessarily the easiest things to chip. Pine is relatively easy to chip. A lot of other sort of smooth bark hardwoods feed really nicely. You know, when you're running the chipper, it's running at a really high RPM. So, you know, it's using fuel. It's, I wouldn't call it stressing the tractor, but I just look at it, it's the dollar bills are flowing. So you need to be kind of efficient on how you are. That's why we're staging things a certain way, like I mentioned, but just, you don't want to have gaps. So, you know, it's nice if you've got someone helping you to sort of help bring branches from further away. But otherwise, you know, usually you got one person there that's feeding it and make sure that everything's getting fed efficiently, not too much, not too little. And ideally, you've got a second person that's sort of there as a backup as needed. That's not always the case, but something to consider. You know, eye protection, it's loud, ear protection are important. And, you know, yes, I can put an 8-inch or so log in here, but that'll kind of slows it down. So we sort of stop at about 6 inches. But you'll see sort of a range of what we run here. Yeah, just to kind of summarize, you know, what we're doing and to make it easy to establish, you know, more of a savanna with open ground, open pasture land, is really working with the natural succession, you know, allowing in rest. But, you know, keep in mind that trees like trees. So if you are planting trees in an alley for just efficient installation, efficient preparation, and then the ability to protect those trees early on with livestock. So you can run your poly fencing down both sides of that tree line to protect them early on, but once they're of maturity, you can sort of graze across them as needed. But finding a cheap, available sort of native tree that you can sort of throw in with your other trees to help sort of create those conditions to support your understory mature hardwoods and other cash crops is one of the strategies that we use and have found to be quite successful here.